All right, we've hit the 5 o'clock hour, so I want to welcome everyone to our second event of the USARA Distinguished Speaker Series. I appreciate those of you who are joining us tonight, those of you who joined us and supported us last quarter as well. We appreciate your support for the association and for the gentlemen and individuals that we're asking to come and speak. For those of you who have not had a chance to look at the website recently, tonight we'll be hearing from retired Brigadier General Craig Nixon. Coming up in April, we will be hearing from Major Jeremy Noble, who is the recently departed regimental psychologist and has been instrumental in helping to form and create some of the programs that the regiment is currently pursuing. And in July, retired Command Sergeant Major Rick Merritt will be joining us. So that's the future for what this program has in store. Hope that many of you will be able to join us for those programs as well. The format we're going to follow tonight is the same as we followed last quarter. I'll give a few remarks here at the beginning. I will turn the floor over to General Nixon, and he'll give us a presentation for 10 to 20 minutes, and then we'll open up the floor to questions. If you have a question that you'd like to submit, please use the chat feature. You can find the button at either in the right-hand column or at the bottom of your page, and we'll get those questions answered as quickly as we can. With that, I will jump into the introduction for General Nixon. General Nixon is a graduate of Auburn University. He is a retired general officer, is now out in the civilian world as an entrepreneur and involved in consulting and participating in nonprofit boards and what have you. He spent over 29 years in the military. Spent over 7 tours, or not over 7 tours, but had 7 tours within the special operations community. Many of you who served in the regiment will recognize him for his time that he spent there as the regimental commander. He also had a turn as the JSOC commander. After retiring from the service in 2011, he joined the McChrystal Group. After a bit of time there, then he moved on to Academy, which some of you in the audience may recognize as the successor entity to Blackwater. And from there, he has moved on into bigger and better things in the world, and I'll let him address that directly. So with that, I thank you for joining us tonight, General Nixon, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Travis. I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate the scheduling too. There's a lot of people that see psychs after talking with me, so it'll be a good sequence to go through. I am really honored to participate. I think the older I get, the more I am kind of focused on the importance of associations like the U.S. Army Ranger Association, all the different associations that support the regiment, veterans associations, and some of the nonprofits. For a couple of reasons. I think one, it allows us a chance to kind of reconnect with people that have the same shared experiences. They also advocate for people that don't have the ability to do that, whether they're on active duty or they just don't have a platform to do it. And then finally, I think as we continue to help kind of Rangers transition or service members writ large transition to private industry, because there are other phases of life. I'm kind of probably on phase 4 right now. I appreciate everybody that dialed in. I know Friday night is there's other things you could be doing. I hope you've got a tall glass of brown liquor there. If not, go get you some 3 Rangers. I agreed to do this before I actually watched General Vitel's speech. Frankly, I'm not sure what I'm going to add after I saw that, although I did follow him as the regimental commander. So I'll try and once again to kind of build on all the stuff that he's done. I also thought about just telling a bunch of war stories, but the only thing that ruins a good war story is a witness, and I don't have really access to see who's dialed in, and I'm sure somebody would call me out. So what I thought I'd do is just kind of briefly talk about the transformation of the regiment, the initial phases of it post 9/11, and particularly kind of while I was there in 03 to 05. And I'll wrap up with a couple things, that I've taken away from my time in the regiment and have applied as I've moved on into the commercial space, either as a consultant or when I was running companies. Well, let me start with a little bit of background. I think Travis talked to most of it. I'm not going to go into any detail, but I do think some of it's important as it talks about where I was at kind of going into 03 and 05. And, I am a little bit like Forrest Gump, although, as he said, I graduated from Auburn instead of Alabama. So I had no intention of joining the Army. Really had no intention of staying in the Army once I joined, and didn't know anything about the Rangers when I started. So it was really through a lot of serendipity and being surrounded by great people that I lasted as long as I did. I did have, prior to assuming the regiment, I had 3 tours in the Rangers. All of them actually were in 375, which is a little bit of an anomaly, and 2 tours of JSOC, one as an action officer and then one as a J3. So over that time, I participated in the combat operations in Just Cause and some of the planning rehearsals for a Desert Shield, Desert Storm, particularly a hostage rescue that never actually occurred, but did expose me to the other side of the joint kind of environment. And then went on to back in the 375 with combat operations at Task Force Ranger in Somalia, and again exposed to kind of the joint operations, the planning for Haiti. At JSOC, I did establish the planning and execution for the PIFWIC, or prisoners indicted for war crimes in Bosnia, and then ultimately took over as the J3 after their war college, initially in Afghanistan and all the planning, and then the actual invasion into Iraq in 03. So I had an opportunity to see the entire kind of JSOC environment, but particularly how the Rangers were operating within that environment, kind of as I was moving into command in 03. And the reality is we were at an inflection point. The war itself was at an inflection point. It was moving from really an expeditionary fight to a sustained fight, both in Afghanistan and Iraq, with the good and bad that comes with that. I mean, we were building PXs and barbershops and everything else. But we were also now doing these kind of continuous operations. And then particularly for the regiment itself. And it was clear to me and a lot of others that we needed to transform to kind of not just meet the current fight, but also to retain our relevance in the GWAT as it continued to evolve. I think one of the things that General Votel talked about in his speech was, the importance of the regiment, and particularly the key part of Abrams' charter and what that means, both to making the regiment better, but also really influencing the larger Army by those officers and NCOs that take those skills out to the rest of the Army. But you only are able to do that if you're relevant. You're only able to recruit and retain the talent if you maintain your relevance. And I believe there was a real need to kind of shift where we were at if we were going to continue that relevance as we continue. You got to remember, in context, this is the time the Army was transforming and was establishing the infantry brigade combat teams and others. So there was a lot at that level. There was a lot of pressure that if we didn't stay ahead of that, that the regiment could be lost in the transition. There was 2 pieces to this. For the larger piece was kind of my vision was that the Ranger Regiment will become the main effort in JSOC's global war on terror. That doesn't mean we were the guys kicking in every doors, or that we were going to compete with some of the other special mission units on their niche tasks. What it did mean was that I wanted the regiment to be at a point that if you took it away, it was the one irreplaceable part of what General McChrystal was trying to do with JSOC writ large, both from the combat, the staff, the support, all of it. But to do that, we had to transform. And we really, if you looked at the combat that we had conducted up to that point, regiment largely did combat operations of a short duration at a very large scale, typically battalion and above, typically by fixed wing or rotary wing aircraft, and almost exclusively by intelligence that was provided by somebody else. So the thesis was, okay, so how do we take that and we turn that into an organization that conducts long duration or continuous operations at a much smaller scale, company or platoon size, over many different locations, largely by ground because there wasn't enough air assets to support that. And then largely by intelligence that we generated ourselves, because there was not enough intelligence assets to provide that. And the conditions were changing too fast to wait for somebody in the ivory tower to tell you what was going on. So that was the thesis. And as part of the thesis, we developed what we called Ranger 21. And that was the overarching plan to implement it. And it included kind of organizationally what we were going to change, the training, but also embedded in that, I'll talk about it a little bit later, is the actual mindset we were focused on. At the organizational level, we really increased the size of the regiment by about a third. The regiment was, and continues to be, much smaller than most people think it is. It's smaller than an infantry brigade combat team right now at its current size. So it's probably, I think what they told me is 3,700. We were less than 3,000 when I took over the regiment. So we increased by about a battalion size, but part of that was doubling the size of the regimental headquarters so that we could operate both full-time deploy forward as well as instituting the transformation that we're doing in the rear. We doubled the size of MI detachment to an MI company. It's now an MI battalion. Doubled the size of RRD, the Ranger Reconnaissance Detachment, to a company. We doubled the size of communication, probably tripled the size of communication, which has continued to expand significantly. We were able to get a battalion set worth of strikers by diverting it from one of the other infantry brigade combat teams so that we could forward deploy that. And we added the Ranger Special Troops Battalion, because up to that point, all that had been really commanded by one captain with help from the DCO. And that is, at least the feedback I've gotten, that's continued to kind of flourish and expand, particularly as the technology advancements. And we did significantly increase the force modernization portion so that we could integrate the technology. So that was at the regimental level. At the battalion level, we added Delta Company to each battalion, another rifle company. We added a Ranger Support Company because up to that point, we were relying on somebody else to support us. We added a Ranger Reconnaissance Detachment to really do the tactical level reconnaissance, because we were moving the regimental reconnaissance company towards more clandestine intelligence collection. And then we added the dog program. So those were kind of the organizational change. It was really about a third larger. And so to do that, we had to significantly change the way we recruited and the assessment selection program. We increased the length by a week. We put the very best people we had down there to do it, with the goal of making the training that the Rangers went through at RAS the standard for all training in the regiment, so that they would see what right looks like during the initial assessment phase. So that's the organization piece. We quickened the training loop, but I'm not going to get into that tonight. But most importantly, I think it was really a mindset deal. If you go back to pre 9/11, the regiment was without a doubt the most singularly disciplined unit in the Army, which means it was in the military. But it wasn't particularly self-disciplined. It was, in a lot of ways, it was rigid. So it was really, how do you take a unit that's extremely disciplined and move it towards a unit that operates with self-discipline? Because if we're going to operate distributed at smaller levels, it required, self-discipline from the individual rangers and the junior leaders, not operating in kind of the rigid confines of, frankly, some of the stuff we were doing. And the singular kind of piece of that, and we attacked it at multiple levels. So one of the ways was through RAS. One of the ways was through the way we organized, because we had a lot of pressure on us to actually create a 4th battalion instead of just reinforcing the 3 existing battalions. So to create another rifle battalion, if you will. And there was a lot of, because of some of the other special mission units we're doing, there was a lot of reasons not to do it. It would have taken more time and more approvals and all that. And one of my big concerns is once you got in the downsize, it would have been the first thing cut, where it's much harder for the Army to drill down below that to cut stuff back. But the other piece is by reinforcing the battalions, we actually widen the base of the triangle. So the regiment's always been a fairly narrow triangle, which meant that people were leaving as the triangle got smaller and smaller. So you could either create a bigger triangle or you can widen the base. And by reinforcing the battalion, and then the way we implemented it, you actually widen the base and you got a little bit more mature level because you created more positions inside of it. But the single most visible thing out of all that was the haircut policy. So I think, I believe that the haircut policy was symptomatic of a number of kind of crutches that we were using at the time around discipline. And if unless we address that up front, we weren't going to really change the mindset. It was the one single thing that we could do that would communicate internally and externally that we were serious about the transformation. And so it wasn't my first RCO note, it was my second. First one was kind of a standard RCO note, but the second one was we're serious about transformation and we're getting rid of the haircut policy. And there was a lot of discussion, internal and external, around that. But frankly, it was kind of like when the Black Beret came out. Shinseki changed the Army while people were talking about the Black Beret. And frankly, my intent was to transform the regiment while people were talking about the haircut policy. And at the end of the day, it was a stupid haircut. We all looked down at it. So anyway, it took a year to kind of develop, coordinate, and get approval to do that. And because we had to go to all of SOCOM, all of USASOC, all of the Army, all the branches, just trying to make sure I got my clock here to do it. And when the implementation of it actually occurred over multiple RCOs, it took probably 3 or 4 different RCOs to actually implement all the pieces of it. Because not only were we doing that, we were continuing to fight operations both in Afghanistan and Iraq. So looking back, I mean, I would say that to the degree that we were successful there, it was because of a couple of reasons. One is that the critical factor to whatever success we achieved was because of the way that we communicated, a strategic communications plan that we developed and implemented. So as General Votel said, I think for senior leaders, you've got to over communicate to get anything out. I had what I call the rule of 5. If you weren't willing to say it 5 times, then you weren't serious about it. And if you expand that out to the number of locations we were in, we were about 14 different locations at that time. So you can do the math. So it just time and space, you've got to communicate a lot. but there's also multiple communications channels. So every organization I've seen in the military has 6 channels of communication: chain of command, non-commissioned officer chain, staff, special staff, rumor control, and the fastest chain of all, the family readiness group. So those channels run all the time. And you either use those channels to inform your decision making and communicate your decision, or you don't, and you enter at your risk because they're going to continue to run. And for important decisions like changing the haircut policy, cultural decisions, it takes all of those channels of communication. So that was the plan, and we had a plan to go after all of that. But because of the size, scope, and scale of it, you can't do that by yourself. You have to have change agents to do it. And the reality is the change agents in the regiment have always been, and in my view, will always be, the senior non-commissioned officers. It's not the officers. I mean, officers can create a vision, they can create a plan, but ultimately, if the regiment's going to change, it's because primarily the platoon sergeants and squad leaders, reinforced by the first sergeants, command sergeant majors, believe in it and are willing to implement. Whether that's the combatives when General McChrystal and Sergeant Major Hall was there, or whether it was Ranger 21 when I was there. If the platoon sergeants, first sergeants, squad leaders didn't buy into it and didn't believe in it, it wouldn't have happened. And frankly, it wouldn't have happened if I didn't have someone like Greg Birch as the regimental sergeant major, who was willing to continue to create that drumbeat throughout the command, because they listened to me. They were nice enough to me, although some of them, I had one first sergeant that met me in Afghanistan as I was getting off the helicopter. The first thing he said is, "Sir, the boys then think you lost your mind." And largely because we were reducing the size of the company. So the boys were actually, company commanders and first sergeants, but it was the reinforcement by Sergeant Major Birch that allowed that to happen. So that's that's kind of the why we did it, how we did it, what we did and how we did it. It was one phase. I do believe it kind of set the foundation for a lot of the things that came after that, post 9/11. General McChrystal and Sergeant Major Hall kind of transformed the way we thought about training and prepping. I think we were able to affect that in the post 9/11 phase. I mean, General Votel fought it. We laid the foundation for effect, and it was implemented over several command teams there. And there's probably a couple other phases that have come. I think they did a really good job of expanding on the Ranger Assessment Program. I think the current RCO and RSM are doing a great job on focusing on the talent management side of it. Phalanx, the Ranger for Life, I think those are great initiatives as we move forward. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I did want to, finally just kind of wrap up with a couple of things quickly that I've gotten out of my time in the Rangers that are still important to me today. First and foremost, I when in doubt, go back to the Ranger Creed. I am, we all kind of grew up learning it, reciting it, internalizing it, and then we spend kind of the rest of our life trying to live up to it. And at times, I've done well, and at times I haven't done well. But the times that I have lived as close as I can to the Ranger Creed are the times that I have found that I'm most successful from a professional standpoint and from a personal standpoint. So I think it's well worth our time to dust it off and at least make sure we can recite it when we get down to Ranger Rendezvous, if that occurs again on schedule. Second thing is just surround yourself with the best people. I think anybody that goes to the regiment is better because they're in the regiment and they're surrounded by people that are the very best. And to the degree that you can impact that professionally or in your life, continue to do that. Surround yourself with good people that challenge you, people that want to move forward. And then finally, it's about relationships. I think, I have never met a good leader that doesn't have friends that they knew 25 years ago. So if you got leaders that exchange friends at every stage of life, I think that's one to steer clear of. So I've been very fortunate with developing some great relationships over time. And where I'm at, it continues to expand and change, but it's all about maintaining those relationships, because conversations build trust, trust builds actions, actions allows you to continue to change things. So that's why I think forums like this are important, and I really appreciate the chance to talk with you tonight. Look forward to answering any questions that anybody has. So thanks, Charles.
I appreciate that. We did get a question from Jim Webb. Jim wants to know what the haircut policy is that you're talking about. I can tell you, as somebody who was a buck sergeant at the time that policy came through, I definitely benefited from not having to march down and get my haircut every week and pay whatever little money the government was going to give me to get the high and tight. You also had mentioned that Greg Birch was the sergeant major at the time that helped to implement that. And I can tell you from having talked to him not too long ago that it is the number one thing that he gets asked about even to this day. And he's not sure that he's so excited that that's become his legacy, but he's living with it. For those who are not familiar with the change that are on the call, most of you will recognize that we had the high and tight haircut up through, what was it, 2002, 2003?
2003.
2003, and then in 2003, the regiment shifted its policy to permit more relaxed standards, and essentially moved away from the high and tight at that point.
If I could just add on that real quick, Travis. So what was interesting is it evolved over time. So when the Rangers were first formed, it wasn't that extreme. So, but from the time they were formed in '76 to the multiple times that I came back to the regiment, at each time it got more extreme. So by the time I got back as the battalion commander, they actually were asking you whether you wanted to shave the sides of your head to meet the new standard for the haircut policy inside the regiment, which frankly was not the policy before. So it's one of those things that continued. It's kind of like the old, the standard is an 8-minute mile. So the platoon runs it at 7 and the squad runs it at 6 and the fire team is doing it at 5:30. I mean, that's kind of where we were evolving to.
Yeah. You had talked a little bit earlier about your involvement in the transformation of the regiment largely from a force that operated in mass, battalion size and up, a lot of airfield seizure exercises, maybe more lockstep. A number of years ago, the RCO had given a speech at Rendezvous about the concern that had come up in that maybe the pendulum had swung too far in the other direction, and now if it wasn't a squad size raid or a platoon size raid, a ranger wouldn't know what to do with the mission. Can you talk a little bit about what your perspective is on whether perhaps the regiment has moved too far in the direction that it started underneath your leadership, or if you think that they are sort of right where they need to be at this point?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not real current on where the regiment's at. I suspect they're fine. I can give you philosophically what I think. I mean, I think one of the key things that when General McChrystal was the regimental commander was refocusing us on the big four. The marksmanship, physical fitness, medical training, and small unit skills. Which by the way, if you went back and looked at the after action report from Somalia, you would see those 4 things are kind of the key things that came out of that. So I still fundamentally believe that, and now frankly, we added mobility as the 5th when I was the regimental commander. But there's to perform an airfield seizure is two different tasks. One is be proficient at small unit skills, and 2 is have leaders that understand how to put it all together. So I think you can continue and should continue to focus on small unit training and concurrently focus on leaders. I mean, we did a lot of airfield seizures when I was growing up. It was good. It trained us. It did a lot, but I think the conditions that the regiment is operating in and will continue to operate in. I just don't see that as a big area that I would, I'd spend a lot of time on.
Okay.
Because I think given a little bit of time, you can figure it out pretty fast. And I'm confident that they could do it. It may not be a CAPEX, but they could get it done.
This next question comes in from Vern Tubbs. First, he extends his hello to you. Vern writes, as you know, as RRD grew into RRC, one of the big issues was the fact that officers were managed by the lockstep infantry branch and had stringent timelines to their career development, and were often directed to move on before they achieved solid skill / mission familiarity and impacted continuity. Has the regiment improved their ability to manage their officer personnel any better to enable skill / mission development in a unique organization like RRC?
I don't know. I mean, that's a pretty specific and technical question. So I don't know. I suspect there's still challenge with that. I know that the Army writ large has moved to, or trying to move to, a very different way of talent management. And coincidentally, the guy that's in charge of that's former Ranger Regiment guy. So he's trying to apply a lot of the things that we learn in special operations. It's just the timing doesn't work well. So I know exactly where Vern is coming from on that. There's been some pretty successful RRC commanders, to include the current SOCOM commander. So it hasn't necessarily inhibited growth after that. I think his is more, are they technically capable in the jobs they're doing? And I don't know. I mean, I think maybe like Vern, we just look for guys that have the prior enlisted time, so they come with a level of experience. I'm not punting on that one. It's not just, I mean, it really is a larger issue. The larger issue is, you've got to be technically competent if you want to lead. But as you get more and diverse and unique, how do you do that? That applies to cyber and a whole bunch of other stuff.
One question that comes up commonly, not just tonight, but also that the association fields often, is because we support both Rangers who served in the regiment as well as Rangers who graduated from Ranger School and perhaps didn't make it to the regiment or chose to serve elsewhere. Can you speak a little bit to what is the significance of Ranger training that soldiers and Rangers are receiving at the school to the members who serve in the regiment today? Has it become obsolete? Is it still important to their to making them better men and better Rangers in the way that it was often perceived in the past? Can you talk to that and your view on it a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, there's two different questions. I think the way you're shaping it is, should people in the Ranger Regiment go to Ranger School? And my answer is yes, absolutely. We should continue that program, because I think it continues to be the best leadership school in the military. So you can have the most technically capable and competent Ranger E4 out there, but going to Ranger School and completing Ranger School enhances his leadership ability and his ability to lead Rangers coming back. And the same thing, I think there are some special skills that don't require, Ranger, Ranger tab, but I think by and large, the leaders in the Rangers should go to Ranger School. Separately, the larger, I mean, I'm going to expand on your question, because one of the questions, and I got involved in a little bit of a political brouhaha over this, between one candidate saying another candidate couldn't call himself a Ranger because he wasn't out of the Ranger Regiment. And that's just freaking nonsense. When I graduated Ranger School in '83, I believed that I was a Ranger. Now, Obviously, I then went and spent a number of tours in the Ranger, but I don't think we should denigrate anyone that say, well, it's just a school. I just don't believe it. It's different. We know it's different, but we shouldn't get into the, well, you're not a real Ranger because you didn't serve at the Ranger Regiment.
Next question comes in from Carl Monger. Abrams' charter worked better than he could have imagined. Seems like NCOs are less likely to rotate out to the big army and back to the regiment due to the specialization and prioritization of the regiment. Do you see that as changing? Does fewer regiment NCOs in the big army hurt the army overall?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. I will say that, I was an advocate, and Mike Hall sent me a note, so I don't know if he's on there anyway. He could probably reiterate this better than me, but I really was an advocate of bringing battalion sergeant majors back after they had successfully led another battalion, and kept kept one of the battalions open so that we could do that for a guy that eventually became the regimental sergeant major. Because I believe that there's an opportunity to do that. It's obviously, I mean, unless you are willing to bring senior NCOs back, sergeant majors back, then none of the sergeant majors will ever want, none of the senior enlisted will ever want to leave because they can't get back. So unless you can show that you're going to continue that flow, it will limit your ability to do that. In spite of that, it's still a triangle, and there's still a large number of senior NCOs just through the numbers that end up moving into the rest of the Army. So I am a big believer that the Abrams Charter should not be limited to officers. And in fact, the more important aspect of the Abrams Charter, just like we talked about in transformation, is really the senior non-commissioned officers, because they're the ones that are going to impact true change in those organizations. I don't know if that answered Carl's question.
I think that you tackled it pretty well, sir. Next question comes from John Davis. John also says hello. Can't wait to golf with you at some point.
Who's that?
John Davis.
Oh, yes, John. How are you?
John says,
there's the guy that should have answered the computer question.
John says, I'm very interested in your thoughts about leadership, having seen it for many years in the military, where the regiment led the way, and now in industry. What do you think are the most valuable leadership qualities and characteristics? What hasn't changed, and what might have changed over time in this dynamic digital age?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's a great question. Interestingly enough, so when we created McChrystal Group, it was really to take the lessons we had learned from kind of transporting and special operations, and then how do you apply those into a commercial space. And that's what I did for the first couple of years after I got out, with General McChrystal, with guys like Sergeant Major Hall and General Vines and others. What's interesting is, the ability, because the ability to transform special operations, the transformation we did in the regiment, was really how do I take a disparate kind of distributed group and change the way we're doing business. And so it ultimately comes, how do you communicate better? How do you make better and faster informed decisions? And how do you implement that change? So to the degree that our cyber capability increases, it actually makes it easier to do that, not less hard to do that. I think the things that we learned there on VTCs, we were at the cutting edge of applying it now in the business space. And businesses now are forced to do it through because of COVID, because of the virtual requirement. What concerns me about it, and I think this is the really interesting part, is I think there's going to be a paradigm shift, because working at home, working virtually requires a level of self-discipline. And what we talked about before is to get self-discipline, you have to go through an environment of discipline. So I think we're reliant right now on people that have been in the office, that have some level of interaction, personal relationship to make the change and do that virtually. But as we bring in new employees that don't have those touch points, that don't have that kind of training, I think the ability to do that, how do you train them? How do you measure their performance is going to become harder and harder. I think the guys that came out of the background that we did have a leg up on doing that, but I think that's where the space is headed. That's not a great answer to the question, but that's a view.
Fair enough. You had mentioned Mike Hall a second ago. The next question comes from him. Mike asked, looking back at the transformations while you were RCO, would you have done anything different? Would you have put some of the pieces in different places?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny. I actually talked with the RCO and the current RCO and RSM today and asked them kind of the same question. Now, to be fair, the RSO wasn't there then. The RSM was there as a squad leader. And I said, okay, if you could beam yourself back in time, what would you have done differently? Because honestly, my leadership style is to move on. My personality is to move on. So I have not, this is probably preparing for tonight's discussion, however disjointed and bad it was, is the most I have focused back on what we did in 03 and 05. Because somebody else is there, somebody else is in charge, they're going to make the decisions as they move forward. I don't know. I don't know if we'd have done it any differently. I mean, we did kind of the best we had based off the information we had at the time, and it was changing pretty rapidly. We tried as hard as we could to build kind of consensus, but it really wasn't a consensus thing as we went through that. So, I don't have any regrets on it. I mean, there was from a tactical standpoint in the fighting of the war, because we were moving so fast, there was probably some gaps and seams in that portion that if I could have predicted those and kind of shaped those before they happen, that's the part of it that, if I had a mulligan, that's what I'd focus on, but not the actual transformation. That's a great question though.
We've got one question left in the queue, and this one again asks you to reflect a little bit. This question comes from Sean McCormick. Sean says he served in looks like SECO 375 from 92 to 96. And he is asking about what your role and involvement was in the October 3rd battle, and whether you had some influence on whether the NATO armor reinforcement rolled out or not. And I think that's more of a history question than a what do you think?
So my role in Task Force Ranger was the kind of second in command of the Ranger portion. So I was, at the time, I was a battalion LNO, and I was assigned also as the LNO to 10th Mountain Division. On the 3rd and 4th, I was back on my normal rotation, was back in the JOC when the initial mission went down. And so I was in the JOC when the first aircraft went down, and when the second aircraft went down. The first aircraft, we had a pretty good plan and a quick reaction force that went to it. When the second aircraft down, we really didn't have a plan. So at that point, General Garrison asked me to lead the rescue mission out to the second aircraft. And we went out, connected with 3rd Battalion, brought them back out, and then prepared to go back out. 10th Mountain was unsuccessful, came back, and then we all went back out in the final. So I was ran kind of the multiple rescue operations through that. So as it was involved with NATO, yeah, I mean, I was involved with all the planning that led to the last piece with the Malaysians, with the Pakistanis, with 10th Mountain, all that. And then and then, you know, kind of participated in the last kind of withdrawal out of there. Probably the singularly most important point of my career, it kind of shaped the way I approached things for the rest of my career in the military, both from a how do you train for things, but also, you know, what happens when you lose momentum. So if you lose momentum in combat, you bleed to get it back. And if you lose momentum big, like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, then you bleed a lot to get it back. You lose strategic momentum. Same thing in business. You lose momentum in business, you bleed money to get it back. So I think there's a lot of lessons learned around how do you maintain momentum once you've got it. So that's been a big part of kind of the rest of my professional career, both in the military and out. It's a good question. Thank you.
I got a thank you from Sean for your answer. There is one additional question that came in from the folks that are watching this live on Facebook. If you wouldn't mind sticking around for one more, is that all right?
Sure.
Okay. I don't have a name to attribute this, but whoever's watching live wants to know if you saw any drawbacks to increasing the size of the regiment and where it's gone to today. Are there negative implications that come from it, and that maybe counterbalance some of the positive things?
Yeah, I mean, it's good. It's a really good question. You know, the question is actually, I'm less concerned about the regiment than I am about some of the JSOC and some of the other organizations. So I think, you know, the question is, at what point do you reach an organizational culminating point? So, you know, at what point do you become so large that you're no longer who you were to begin with? The regiment's a long, long way from that. I mean, I've had this discussion back and forth with other people that serve in JSOC and where that's at. I think that's the thing that they got to focus on. I'm very confident that they can continue to focus on that. But it's, you know, from the time I was there, the first time to where it's at now, it's a world of difference. So the question is it the same thing? Do you get the same experience? And so from a regiment standpoint, do the officers and NCOs, do they get the experience that is going to reinforce Abrams' charter as they go back out? Or is it so big that your tour becomes a very narrow, you know, sit in the corner and do this kind of not broad enough? It's not even close to being there, but I think it's a good question, and it's something you should always challenge yourself. I've had other leaders that said, after 10 years, you should blow any organization up because the bureaucracy has taken over. So I don't necessarily subscribe to that, but I do think you got to continue to assess whether bureaucracy has taken over, whether you become too rigid, whether you are the organization that you want to be. So it's a great question.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time tonight, sir. We're very grateful that you were willing to spend looks like about 45, 50 minutes here with us. This is, as I mentioned in the beginning, our second in the Distinguished Speaker Series. Our goal is to try to bring individuals who the average person, the average ranger maybe doesn't have easy access to, and allow them to share their stories and their perspective of the world. And I think that you did a great job of that tonight, and we're grateful for the opportunity to spend some time with you.
Well, I appreciate it. Here's all the Rangers and fans out there, and to our fallen comrades. So appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Back to everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening.